Thanks for listening to the Susie Larson Life podcast, available thanks to support from listeners like you.
It's only just a matter of sing, so the back row is your glide, 'cause walking just won't do dance. You don't have to know how to. Ever since Grace got you there.
Welcome to Susie Larson Live. Always so honored to get to spend this time with you. In fact, I look forward to bringing you conversations every single day that hopefully inspire you in your faith walk, that deepen your understanding of God's Word, and that heightens your awareness of His very real presence in your life. Well, though we don't often cover marriage topics on this show, and we do that because we have programming in our lineup that often covers marriage, we're going to talk about marriage today. So if you're single and you long to be married, I want you to stay tuned because you're going to find some helpful tools for your future relationship. If you're single and you're happy to be so, today's content might not be for you, but I'm thinking there's something here that God has for you. So I hope you'll stay tuned. And of course, if you're married, for sure, I want you to lean in and listen with an open, humble heart. Tomorrow I'll be talking to Addison Bevere, and he'll talk about how to bring life into our prayer life. It's going to be a great conversation. Today, I'll be talking to Dr. Emerson Eggerichs, and he joins me to talk about his new devotional, the Love and Respect Devotional, 52 Weeks to Experience Love and Respect in Your Marriage. He says this: the human spirit is willing and the flesh is weak, but the Holy Spirit is all powerful. We've got a handful of copies of this hardcover, wonderful devotional to give away. You just got to text the word book if you want in on the drawing, 877-933-2484. Quick announcement before I hear from our guest today. The Set Apart Conference is coming up March 8th and 9th. Lisa Harper, Crystal Evans-Hurst are the keynote speakers, along with plenty of really great breakout speakers. You can come for one day or both. Find more information on our website at myfaithradio.com. All right, let me tell you about my guests. We'll get him on the show. Dr. Emerson Eggerichs is the internationally known public speaker on the topic of male-female relationships. Based on over 4 decades of counseling, as well as scientific and biblical research, Dr. Eggerichs and his wife, Sarah, developed the Love and Respect Conference, which they present to live audiences around the country. He's authored many books, including the national bestseller, Love and Respect. Listen to this, selling over 2 million copies. Wow. Married since 1973, he and Sarah live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and have 3 adult children, 7 grandchildren. Dr. Eggerichs, it's been years, but it's so good to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Susie. I've been looking forward to this and appreciate that introduction.
Absolutely. So we love to start the show every day the same way with the same question, and it's this: what's God been speaking to you about these days?
Well, it's a good question. In fact, I have been thinking about how the Lord reveals His universal will in Scripture, and but there is this illumination that these promises that He makes come to us as individuals. So He promises us wisdom, but there's a unique thing. James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men generously and without reproach. And so the promise is for every believer that God will give us wisdom. And yet the beautiful and powerful thing there is that it comes uniquely to my situation, my circumstances. It's kind of got my name written on it, so to speak. And in fact, I saw 8 different promises of God that come to us in a sense uniquely. There's wisdom, there's peace, there's comfort, there is strength, there's provision, there's protection, there's deliverance. And these kinds of promises, come at us, and how do we appropriate those? But I was thinking of the first one on wisdom. I love that promise there. It's in the context of James 1 where we have trials, and in some ways we've been foolish in those trials, and kind of James pivots and says, hey, if any of you lacks wisdom because you haven't been dealing with this trial in a wise manner, just ask God. And then he says, who gives to all generously. He's not going to hold back on that. And then I love that next phrase, without reproach. He doesn't slap us from heaven, so to speak, that we've been so foolish. And he doesn't say to us, it's about time you turn to me. But it's a beautiful thing that's just encouraged my heart, without reproach, without reproach. And it's just a good reminder that our Heavenly Father wants to give us wisdom. He wants to give it to us generously. He does so without reproach, even if we've kind of messed things up along the way. It's a new beginning. It's a new day. And that's something that, I've been focused a little bit on here in the last 10 days or so as I've tried to maybe serve some other people along that line.
That's just beautiful. And this is why we asked that question. I know someone needed to hear that today. And as you're talking, Dr. Emerson, I'm thinking of even how God's heart was broken by the Israelites because they stopped seeking his wisdom in the Old Testament. That actually was offensive to him, where they no longer saw the need to seek his wisdom. And so I love that not only does he invite us, but he never, excuse me, rolls his eyes at us. He truly wants us to seek his way. And then he wants to show us the way. I think that's speaks of the kind of father he is, you know?
No, well said. No, I agree. It's
Hmm.
exactly right. And it gives us comfort. And again, that person who sometimes is defeated by defeat and they kind of just give up, I think the word is that's not how the Lord feels about you. And don't, it's been said that God created us in his image, and we've been trying to return the favor ever since. And what that
Yeah.
means is
Have mercy.
sometimes
Yeah.
we make God into our own image. In other words, if we were God, we wouldn't be happy with us, and so we would reproach us. But we need to be reminded He's God, we're not, and we need to trust that as we start again, it's almost like we said, "Lord, forgive me again," and He said, "Again, I don't know if I remember the last time."
Hmm. Aren't we blessed? Wow. Thank you for that. Well, if you don't mind, I would love some backstory on your marriage journey and specifically how and when the idea of love and respect first came alive to you.
Well, the love and respect message comes from Ephesians 5:33. It's the summary statement to what most would consider the greatest treatise in the New Testament on marriage. And Paul there says a husband must love his wife, and there's no debate about that. The Greek word is agape, that a husband is to unconditionally love his wife in the same way that Christ loves the church. And then the next verse says, and a wife is to not love her husband. There's no command to a wife in the Greek to agape love her husband. There is the Titus 2 passage where it said the older women are to encourage the younger women to love their husbands and love their children. The Greek word there is phileo, and I distinguish those words. It's more of a friendship love. No child believes mommy doesn't love them unconditionally. You say to a child, "Does your mommy love you?" "Oh yeah." "Does she like you?" "No,
Hmm.
we've been bad today." So it's fascinating that Paul says that she is to respect her husband. And back in 1998, right about that time, as I was meditating on that, because I study the Bible 30 hours a week for the pulpit ministry in East Lansing, Michigan, a college town. That was what the leaders wanted me to do, exposit scripture. I thought, wow, there's something here. What's with this that a husband must love and a wife must respect? Why didn't he say love, love, respect, respect? What or reverse it, respect, the wife and so I began to just meditate on that, and I know that we all need love and respect equally, but there was something here that was being highlighted that I began to think about, and that gave birth to what eventually became the Love and Respect book, and we can talk specifically about that. But that's where the idea first came, and when I began to have these insights, I called Sarah into my office and I said, "What do you think about this?" And we were very excited together, and of course that led to our live conferences for many years, and then I wrote the book in 2004, and it's been quite a ride ever since.
Hmm. Imagine. Wow. And how would you describe your early years as a couple and when did you kind of hit your stride where you started to learn how to be married well to each other?
That's a good question. I think, obviously there are ages and stages in marriage, and one of the things we talk about are, these moments. Sarah had breast cancer back in 2004, and we didn't know if she would survive that or not. And so these kinds of things do affect a marriage over the time. But I think one of the things we've talked about is the importance of having goodwill. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, verses 33 and 34, that the husband is concerned about how to please his wife, and the wife is concerned about how to please her husband. And I think early on, Sarah and I, we didn't have the language or vocabulary and didn't even know, I think, maybe that verse or didn't pay attention to it. But I think we tried to take the posture that we're allies, not enemies, that we're friends, we're not foes. And though there were moments where early in the marriage, I thought, well, wow, I didn't know I was that bad. We'd have these conflicts and I disappointed her or whatever. We had those normal struggles that couples do. But I think what we really were committed to was we're in this. I mean, there's no option, there's no out. And part of that is that in Sarah's extended family, there were 24 divorces, 24 divorces. And in my family, my mom and dad divorced each other, but then my mom and dad remarried each other, and for which I'm very grateful. So I think Sarah and I brought to the table a recognition that I think there was never really ill will and evil will. I think people just had honest misunderstandings. They just didn't know how to do this dance together, and they ended up hurting each other, frustrating each other, because they didn't have a little knowledge and they didn't have a little skill to navigate these conflicts. It almost had the attitude, if we love each other, we shouldn't be having any conflicts or challenges. And then I think Sarah and I early on realized, wait a minute, there's going to be normal, honest differences of opinion, and we're going to have to negotiate how we're going to, move through this without, my dad had rage issues. He would just go into rage. And as a young boy, I'm thinking that didn't, that reaction didn't seem to fit the situation. And I couldn't conceptualize this, but I just knew in my heart this wasn't right. So I think early on, Sarah and I were committed. We believed in each other's goodwill. We were going to weather the conflict and try to resolve it and become the better for it. And so those were some of the things we experienced earlier on, even though we didn't have our understanding of the love and respect system that we now do, that has been very helpful to us.
So good. And you established from the get-go that you're on the same team. And we're going to circle back to the goodwill idea in a little while, because I pulled some quotes out of your book on that one. I thought it was super important. But, I was thinking as you're talking, years ago, a young couple asked Kevin and I, we were kind of mentoring them. They said, why did God make husbands and wives so different? And I just instinctively answered, this is before I knew about any of your content, but I said, because it'll take humility, teachability, and love to really make it work. And you would add, it also takes respect. And again, we're going to unpack that on a deeper view. Talk about why respect is so important to men, especially. It's to both, really, but as you say, to men.
Well, no, exactly right. And that's where the culture takes a position that the respect must be earned. You've got to deserve it. And that is really the way this is often assessed. But men among men, we honor the spirit of the man, even if he hasn't acted in a respectable way. We know the key to motivating a man to change isn't by showing him contempt for who he is as a human being. No great male leader leads other men that way. We will say, you're one of the most honorable guys I know. Now explain to me how in the world you just did that stupid thing. We approach each other with a sense of honoring the inner heart. We don't violate the inner person. We don't look at them with disgust and disdain and say contemptuous things about who they are. You're going to lose the spirit of a man. Pat Riley, who's the president of the Miami Heat, had me come and speak to the team, and he and I spent about 4 or 5 hours together talking about this issue of how do you honor men and how do you treat them justly? And men just respond differently. But this culture takes the position that because we're equal, therefore we should be the same. And because the culture of intimacy seems to favor women, and the belief that women have emotional intelligence, and if all of us just kind of responded in the way that women respond, we'd all be happy. And so there is a tendency not only to be dismissive of the male, but there's almost a view that his way of doing things is inappropriate. And in the process, if we try to motivate him to be loving by showing him disrespect, you can't use unholy means to achieve those worthy ends. And so I began to unpack, because I went to military school for 5 years, 8th grade to 12th grade, and I was thinking about West Point at one juncture. This idea of honor was deep in my soul, and I realized, the culture doesn't seem to feel about this toward men the way that I do. And so I began then to unpack the importance of this, in particular in relationship to a man. Shanti Feldhahn, who's a good researcher, Harvard Graduate School, called me one day and she said, Emerson, we're going to do this a research survey of 400 American males. It's a random sample. It's decision analysts out of Houston are doing this. It's really a representative group of the American male. And she said, I'd like to ask this question. Do you think I should? And I was all over it. I said, absolutely. And the question is this: would you men rather be left alone and unloved in the world, or be viewed as inadequate and disrespected by everyone? Again, would you men rather be left alone and unloved in the world, or be viewed as inadequate and disrespected by everyone? Almost 75% of the people, Susie, on these men, 75% of these men said they'd rather be left alone and unloved. The idea of being viewed as inadequate and disrespected is very painful to them. It's very, very painful. But even there, that's interpreted as narcissistic. And those who do that are wrong. That's just not the case at all. And Jesus said in Matthew 19:4, have you not read, he who made them from the beginning made them male and female? And so we need to give the benefit of the doubt to those individuals who are saying that. Now, can men be narcissistic? Absolutely. Can women be prima donnas? Yes, but we aren't going to take these anomalies or these marginal individuals and then say this is true of every male, every female. And so my campaign has been, let's see if we can better understand this, because at the end of the day, most wives want to connect with their husbands. They want their husbands to move toward them. They want their husbands to say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? They long for that. And but the way in which they go about doing that doesn't always work, because I don't think they understand how a man is filtering it through his blue grid that's different than her pink grid. Does that make sense?
Oh, this is so good. And I'm just wondering, for the men that are listening today, will you just text me and tell me if this is giving voice to you? We've had Shanti on plenty of times. She's a friend of mine as well. And I remember the day she brought that stat to the show. It was heartbreaking to me, because Emerson, you see even in commercials and comedy TV shows constantly that the wife is stellar, gorgeous, sharp, and the husband's frumpy and idiotic. And it's like, and it's a narrative that the culture is accepting. So if you put that out there and then you kind of put this impossible standard on men, you've got to be like me in order for you to be okay. But God didn't make him like me. So this has got to give so much voice to men. When we come back, I want to hear just what some of the men have said to you as you've given voice to them, about how they're wired and what really speaks to their soul. As we go to break, I just want you to think about that. And friends, if you don't mind, I do these informal polls on the show all the time. But those of you who are married, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being extremely healthy and thriving in marriage, how would you rate your marriage? Just an honest assessment of, would you say we're a 5, we've got room to grow, or we're a 7, or we're kind of at the bottom of the barrel, just barely hanging on? Would you text me just a number? I would love to know. All of those answers will be anonymous. Just helps me get a sense of where people are at who are listening today. Text me 877-933-2484. And if you've got a question for Dr. Emerson, send that in a separate text. Here's the number. By now, you should have it on speed dial or have it in your phone, because we use it every day. 877-933-2484. We'll be back in a minute. This is Susie Larson, host of Susie Larson Live. You know, solitude is one thing. Loneliness, another. We can enjoy rich times with God in solitude, yet we can be in a large crowd and feel all alone. It all depends on the season we're in and the perspective we embrace. Maybe, just maybe, you're walking through a season where nobody quite understands what you're walking through. Well, friend, you know what? Jesus knows. You're never alone. Even so, every one of us needs encouragement on this journey. We would love to encourage you today. If you need some texts of audio encouragement, we would love to send those to you. Text the word lonely to 877-933-2484. Again, text the word lonely to 877-933-2484. Want you to be reminded that you're not alone. He is with you. We're with you too. Connecting faith to life, Faith Radio. Thanks so much for tuning into Susie Larson Live. Got a special guest today, Dr. Emerson Eggerichs, and his book is titled The Love and Respect Devotional, 52 Weeks to Experience Love and Respect in Your Marriage. And he says at the outset, he kind of wrote this with men in mind, and we as women will glean from it, but he's trying to meet the man who feels in devotionals like they're being manipulated to be more like the woman, and that's just not the case. And in fact, one gentleman texted in, because I said, how you feeling, guys? As you're hearing this, how you feeling? And this guy says, dizzy. This guy is spot on. Before the break, I also asked you to text me, just if you don't mind, an informal poll here, scale of 1 to 10, 10 being your marriage is thriving and healthy, and 0 to 1 as barely hanging on. How would you rate your marriage? And all those numbers are, of course, anonymous, but we're getting quite a few zeros and 1s and 2s and 3s, some 4s, some 6s and 7s. And thank you for your honesty. And I want you to just really believe that God can breathe fresh life in your marriage. I would love to know from you, Emerson, how men have responded to your message over the years.
Well, just as you were saying about the survey, I'm doing a live webinar Wednesday night called Marital Disappointments. They can find out information at loveandrespect.com, loveandrespect.com. because those low numbers there sadden my heart as they do yours, that
Hmm.
people are disappointed. They have unmet expectations, and I'm going to be addressing that very thing. And we also have testimonies on that website every Tuesday called Testimony Tuesday. But in response to your specific request, men have said you put a voice and vocabulary to what I've been feeling. We talk about the crazy cycle. And one of the things I need to say, we all need love and respect equally. That's very important for every woman
Yeah.
listening to me. Women need respect. Peter says, honor your wife. And so we've never been truncated, but we've asked 7,000 people this question. When you're in a conflict with your spouse, do you feel unloved at that moment or disrespected? 83% of the men say they feel disrespected. And one reason for that is that men know their wives are loving. They don't question that. They know she's virtuous. He doesn't have a problem with her. He feels she has a problem with him. And that distinction needs to be clearly understood. He knows she's a loving woman. He just doesn't think she likes him. And so he pulls away from that because he feels disrespected and dishonored for who he is. And that is what really de energizes the husband. But we then, on the other side of that survey, 72% of the women say they feel unloved. And so there is a felt need here that is pink and blue. She leans on the love side typically, and there's no movie that ends with the hero embracing the damsel saying, I want to respect you the rest of my life. It doesn't go down that way. And Hallmark has tried to do cards where the husband on the 10th anniversary says, I really respect you, babe. And that doesn't go over either. So given that people are willing to work with me on this, we're talking about a felt need, love and respect. And if the roles reverse, that's fine. Sarah said to me at times, you're not respecting me right now. And there are times that I'm feeling unloved. So I'm not dogmatic about that. But this is stated for this reason. I saw a correlation that when a wife feels unloved, she tends to react in a way that feels disrespectful to her husband. That's not her intent. She's trying to awaken him to that deeper longing of her heart, but she appears disrespectful. No one talks to him that way. And when he feels disrespected, he tends to react in a way that feels unloving to her. He would die for her. He's not trying to be unloving, but that's how he appears. So this gave birth to what I call the crazy cycle. Without love, she reacts without respect. Without respect, he reacts without love. Then without love, she reacts without respect. Without respect, he reacts, and you can see this thing start spinning. And I often ask people, when you have a conflict with your spouse, have you ever noted that their spirit deflates or gets provoked? If so, the issue is probably no longer the issue. The issue now is she's probably feeling unloved, though she could feel disrespected. And he's probably feeling disrespected, though he could possibly feel unloved. But generally speaking, it goes down this way. And that's where men have come up to me and answered your question. They said, what you just described in the last 3 minutes captures what I've been experiencing in my marriage for 37 years, and no one has put a voice and
Hmm.
vocabulary to it. So, Susie, does that make sense, what I just
Hmm.
said?
So good. So, so good. And you present it so well. This dear listener wrote in and said, question is, how, as a wife, do you heal after you do with porn? Even after forgiveness, the residue of insecurity and questioning everything you thought your marriage was remains. I feel constant tug of war. I so badly want to love and respect and trust my husband. I'm just really struggling. I'm thinking, Emerson, this is not the first time you've received such a question in such a scenario. What advice would you have for her?
No, and this is the kind of pain that many women are feeling. I saw my dad attempt to strangle my mother to death when I was 2.5. So, I mean, I understand
Oh, wow.
the pain that many of these women are experiencing. But when we launched Love and Respect, I said, my mission is to serve people of goodwill, because what we'll have are all these questions. Well, how do you deal with pornography? How do you deal with physical abuse? How do you deal? And that conversation will then get turned in a direction that leaves a lot of other listeners out there who are basically good-willed individuals. There isn't evil going on, but they don't like each other. And furthermore, as Christ followers, they're getting derailed because they all sense that Jesus Christ joined them together. Jesus said it, that Father has joined us together. And I'm writing a book on the win-win marriage based on 1 Corinthians 7, and that's about marriage. And Paul 9 times says that we are called. And I've asked hundreds of couples, do you feel that God joined you together and that he's called you to something bigger than just the relationship? And almost every Christ following couple I know say yes, but they get derailed. Even though they have goodwill, there isn't addiction, they aren't abused, there's not abandonment, and they are struggling. So my primary campaign is with those who are good-willed, but just, feeling like they don't like each other because they're on the crazy
Hmm.
cycle. Now, to this particular lady, this is
Yeah.
where she needs a third party and to sit down and talk about that. But what I will say is that he's addicted, possibly. Many men are, and many women are addicted to their issues out there as well. We have some real painful realities. What I do know is this, that you cannot serve that person with contempt and hostility. If a husband has a wife who has issues, your hostility toward her is not going to work. So the key is we've got to confront these situations with a tone and demeanor that keeps that person's heart open. And that, though, is going to need counseling. And my son is a clinical psychologist, and he's dealing with these issues day in and day out. And my heart hurts with her, like my own young boy heart hurt when my dad was enraged and had issues with my mom. But I would rather
Hmm.
stay on track with
Wow.
those others out there who are saying, help me. We're roommates.
Yeah.
We're not hating each other, but we're not fulfilling God's call in our life right now. Individually, we're seeking Christ. I just spoke to 4,000 people a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I believe many of you are individually seeking Christ. And they said, yes, but they're not doing so as a husband and wife because they have this undercurrent called the crazy cycle, and they're deflating each other and provoking each other. And then they
Yeah.
pull back from each other. And they're doing that dance and they're
So good.
frustrated because they sense they're not on God's mission.
Hmm. I want to say this to this one dear one who texted in about her husband. Paul talks about from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. And I'm just wondering if you ask God for a vision for your husband, what he sees. What does he see? God, give me eyes to see him as you see him and call that out of him. I mean, my hubby is amazing. We've been married almost next March, it'll be 40 years. But in his workaholic years, pre-cancer, he was working so much, and I would put my hand on his shoulder to pray for him before he went out the door. And I would just say, thank you for this mighty man of faith. Thank you for the way he protects our family. And the more I prayed, the more faith rose up in me, but it also rose up in him. And he just said, it helped me know I was made for better things and helped me see even the error of my ways without you saying a word. So I'm just going to ask and pray that God would help you see your husband through the lens of scripture, through what God sees. And then you could start to pray for him in a way. And also, I agree with Emerson, seek healing for your heart because your heart needs some healing as well. But I want to circle back to this idea of goodwill. You said when you and your spouse see each other as good-willed, good things are in store for your marriage. And it reminds me, Emerson, of a time I spoke at a women's conference. And one of my sessions was about being alone in marriage and talking about what do you do when the weight's all shifted onto you? What are the things that surface? And this woman approached me and she was guttural sobbing. And she said, I was ready to pull the trigger. My husband was expecting that phone call anytime. She goes, as I sat and listened to you, I realized I have a great marriage. I have a rotten perspective. It's all me. She said, I have nitpicked him. I have picked him apart. He's a good man. He loves us. And she said she was so broken that she called and begged his forgiveness, and he was floored by it. But I wonder how often that impacted me so deeply, because I wonder how often we think ourselves right out of a God-given, potentially wonderfully amazing situation.
Well, my comment is twofold. One, going back to what you said about how you responded to Kevin, and or is it Kevin or Keith? Did you say?
Yeah,
I think
Kevin.
Kevin,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this maturity in you to get above your own personal needs. Those needs that you had for a connection, him not being a workaholic, being too long away from you, all of those are legitimate concerns and burdens that many wives carry. And yet you spoke life into him. You believed in his inner man. You believed in him, and you were letting go of some things that you personally needed with the belief that if I just hound him and nag him all the time, he's going to pull back. That's the same thing with a husband, continually talking about his wife's weight. You need to lose weight. I mean, there are certain things that the culture now says are taboo, but we don't understand the taboos on the other side. And we don't believe that if you put your hand on your husband and pray that he would be today used of God, that this honorable man would be blessed of the Lord, that somehow there's this belief that you're going to give him license to be away from you even longer. There is this undercurrent belief that if I do those things, I'm giving him permission to fail to love me in the way I need, when it's precisely the opposite. And even as you said about this woman at the conference, yeah, sometimes one of the standard emails I get is women will want me to understand what they're going through, and they'll give me 4 to 6 negatives, and they're just struggling because they don't know how to deal with these negatives. And then they'll say, and always say, but I'm not perfect. And then she'll say a couple things about herself, but she said, what do I do? And I said, my heart hurts. Every woman who writes me, I see her as my own mom. And so I said, well, let's begin with this. Give me a list of the things that are positive about him, and then I'll circle back to these negatives. And I'll get an email back saying, thank you for having me do that exercise. I fell in love with my husband all over again. And I think the point we know from biased research that we tend to fixate on the negative because we long not to be hurt or disappointed. And over a period of time, we just kind of see those things. And it doesn't mean that those things are not there. Sometimes, though, we need to step back and see the bigger picture. And that helps us then be a little bit more being able to navigate those negatives in a different way. And furthermore, to your very point of your example, suddenly that man comes under conviction. Men are not what we call expressive responsive. Women are more expressive responsive. So if you say, oh, I just believe in you so much. Oh, thank you so much. That means so much. Men are silent around that kind of thing. They don't talk, but they're thinking a million miles an hour. Your husband was very aware of what you were doing. Not suspicious of the motive, but he was being convicted as you gave voice. Keith said, hey, or Kevin said, I am, he was aware. And over time, that positive way that you treated him softened him, which is precisely what Peter says. You can win your husband without a word by your respectful behavior. 1 Peter 3, verses 1 and 2. There again, not only did Paul say this, Peter said this, and we're going to have to ask ourselves, are we truly people of faith? Do we really believe? Or do we select what we're going to trust here? And I say to many wives, let's trust the Lord, that if you do what Susie did in relationship to Kevin, that over time it's just going to work. Now, there's no formula here. You can't absolutely promise this, but contempt will never work. Contempt is the most toxic of attitudes. According to the University of Washington, they studied 2,000 couples for 20 years in their love laboratory, and they said contempt is the toxic that destroys marriage.
Wow. As we go to break, I just can't help but think as I'm listening to you, Emerson, that when I pray, if I'm in a panic mode and I'm scared and I'm begging and pleading, I never feel better after those prayers, even though Jesus invites us to pray at all times and all ways. But when I pray from above my circumstance and I remind my soul who God is, when I say, you're a good father, you're faithful. I don't understand this right now, but I know I have a history with you, which means I have a future with you too. In the same way, faith rises up in me. And so I so agree with you. And I pray those listening, you don't hear that what I did with Kev as manipulation in any way, because I knew he was a good man. I knew he loved God and he loved us. Those things I knew to be true. And I had to just trust that God was going to work the rest out. So as we go to break, when we come back, I want to carry this idea of good-willed nature further, because I think it's such a bedrock for a solid, good marriage. So on the other side, Emerson, let's talk about, you say we get into trouble when we kind of assign motives that aren't there, where we assume ill will instead of believing goodwill. We're going to talk about how do you refrain from that, especially if you've developed a significant habit of believing the worst instead of believing the best. And single friends, if you're listening, this is even a biblical concept that you can apply to all of your relationships, learning to believe the best. Talking to Dr. Emerson Eggerichs today. His book is The Love and Respect Devotional, 52 Weeks to Experience Love and Respect in Your Marriage. You can text the word book if you want in on the drawing, 877-933-2484. These are short devotionals and they have a prayer, and there's just this charge or this kind of application that's very doable, really good advice when you're in a conflict, things you can say to each other and say to yourself so that you don't go off the rails. Really helpful information. We'll be back in a minute. Thanks so much for tuning into Susie Larson Live, talking to Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. His book, he's a New York Times bestselling author, by the way, and his book just released, The Love and Respect Devotional. Beautiful hardcover devotional, 52 weeks to experience love and respect in your marriage. And he purposely wrote this with men in mind because men tend to be intimidated a little bit by devotionals. And we as women at times try to look to the devotional time to make that connection that we long for. And he explains why that's kind of a problem. In fact, he likens it to so we can understand if the husband asked for sex immediately after after doing devos together, we would be like, wait, what? And yet sometimes we put the burden on our devotional life to meet all the other needs that we have to connect emotionally. Now, that could happen as you get together with the Lord and with each other and talk and share your hearts. But a big part of this is understanding that God made us so different. And we've got a handful of copies to give away. You can text the word book to 877-933-2484. So I want to talk about this goodwill that you talk about. You said when you and your spouse see each other as good-willed, good things are in store for your marriage. So let's flip that a little bit and talk about how we get into trouble is when we assign motives that aren't there and we're quick to assume intended ill will when they don't intend it that way. Unpack that if you would.
No, it's very important. And as I referenced earlier, it's based primarily on 1 Corinthians 7, verses 33 and 34, where Paul says the husband's concerned about how to please his wife, and the wife is concerned about how to please her husband. And what's stunning is Paul wrote Romans, the great treatise on the total depravity of the human heart. And we need a savior, Paul is saying. We can't justify ourselves, but because we are unable to justify ourselves in the eyes of God does not mean that the residual effect of his creation and creating us in his image has been removed. And so this is where that dualism, the good I want to do, I don't, and bad I want to avoid, I end up doing. So there is this, dilemma that all of us experience. But when he's appealing to those who are married at Corinth, he doesn't say, well, the reason you have these conflicts and trouble in your marriage is you're both sinful and selfish. Get over it. No, he doesn't do that. In fact, he actually appeals to the belief that the man is concerned to please his wife. He doesn't get up early in the morning to storyboard ways to displease her or show her that he doesn't care. But at the end of the day, many wives will say, it doesn't seem that he cares about me and he's not really focused on pleasing me. And the same thing, men can say, I know she's caring, but I think she cares for the kids more than me. I'm just kind of, backseat here, marginalized. I don't think she's really trying to please me. Certainly it doesn't feel that way as it did in courtship days. It seems like, I'm just the paycheck here bringing it home for her. I mean, we have these, various sentiments that are expressed. And so my focus has been, well, what does this mean that he's concerned and she's concerned that he wants to please her and she wants to please him when it doesn't seem to be playing out that way? Well, it's because I think there's this honest misunderstanding. This is fascinating, what I'm about to share with you. The University of Washington studied those 2,000 couples for 20 years, saw something in this love laboratory where they had medical doctors there, they had clinical psychologists, they had linguists, they had people monitored for heart beats per minute, BPMs they call it. And they noticed that during the marital conflict, and people would let down their hair, they were husband and wife, eventually they just started reacting to each other, as many of us do behind closed doors. And they noticed 85% of those who withdrew and stonewalled was the husband. 85%. He would just, during a conflict, he just shut down and just emotionally disengaged. And they asked the women, what do you feel about that? And the women said it was so common that they made a descriptor called an act of hostility. Every woman said, he hates me, he doesn't love me. And so they put the descriptor act of hostility. All the women were saying that because they said, we can't imagine shutting down over what they perceive to be just a minor criticism of who he is and what he's done, right? And so you have this feeling that when he withdraws, it's an act of hostility. Whereas they said, well, what's going on with him? And they noticed that his heartbeats got to 99 beats per minute during this marital conflict. He may look stoic, but he's in warrior mode. That's the very insulin and whatever comes over him that would cause him to throw himself over his wife and take the bullet, and he dies so that she can live. That's that protective instinct. But if it gets provoked in a marriage, like picking a fight, he's got to disengage to calm down, which in the world of men, among men, that's the honorable thing to do. Men will withdraw from each other because they're lethal. So they do the honorable thing to protect the relationship because the relationship is far more important than the specific issue that has, triggered this particular conflict. So one of the questions I ask at our conferences of the audience, is it an act of hostility when he withdraws, or is it an act of honor when he withdraws? And my answer is yes. It just depends on whether you videotape in pink or blue. And couples, Susie, are not capable at times of saying we're both right. Neither one of us are wrong. We tend to say, I'm right, you're wrong. And so here's the point. If you conclude that your husband's really a hostile, evil-willed, ill-willed man when he's just trying to do the honorable thing, then you're not going to see his deeper heart. The researchers also found something else going on. Women criticize and complain during those conflicts. They couldn't escape that, even though it wasn't politically correct. She was giving voice and vent to what she was feeling. He hurt my feelings, and I'm gonna complain about that. I'm gonna criticize with the hope that he's going to hear me, right? But they asked the men basically, when she criticizes and complains, and we know why she does, is because she cares. She truly cares. The nurturing capability and nature of women is off the chart. And all the social researcher, she's the caregiver, she's the nurture. She just can't not care. It's a beautiful thing. So she does this because she cares. But the men were asked, what do you feel? It feels like she's using this topic as an opportunity to send me a message that she has contempt for who I am as a human being. Wow. So the question is it rooted in care or is it rooted in contempt? Well, the answer is yes. It just depends on whether or not you're videotaping in pink and blue. So circling back now to my point, one of the reasons that we believe that our spouse does not have goodwill as a woman, because we think he's doing the hostile thing. He's interpreting me as contemptuous and trying to dishonor him when all I'm trying to do is do the caring thing. And so she's absolutely convinced she's correct. And she talks to her girlfriends. They all have the same message. And so it's very difficult to believe that the man is trying to do the honorable thing, not the hostile thing. And he's pulling back from the feeling that she has disdain and contempt for him. And he's just trying to protect the relationship from this thing escalating. And the same thing on the other side. He misinterprets her. She confronts because she cares. And she's not trying to dishonor him. She's not trying to show him contempt. She's actually saying, I have a need that only you can meet. And I'm coming to you this way because I expect you to decode that. So one of my campaigns, Susie, if this makes sense to you, is to help people decode what's really going on. Because if we say to that husband, you are an uncaring individual and you are hateful and hostile, when the truth is he's just trying to avoid her contempt and do so by being an honorable man. You talk about two people that misunderstand, and the same thing. If a man says she is a contemptuous woman who seeks to not even appreciate me as an honorable man, but labels me as hostile, and that I don't appreciate her as a caring person. I mean, you talk about, at the end of the day, people are completely baffled. So we have to then back up and say, I'm going to make a decision based on 1 Corinthians 7:33 and 44, that my husband is concerned to please me, but he goes about it in a method that isn't the method of my choice. His motive is right, but his method isn't what is appealing to me. So they're going to have to come up with a win-win strategy on this. And same thing, to realize your wife has a good motive, but her method of bringing about healing to the relationship is different than the way you and I would do it as a man. And if we don't decode this, we're going to end up resenting each other. And it's just going to get crazy. Without love, she reacts without respect. Without respect, he reacts without love, and it keeps spinning ad nauseum. That makes sense?
So much sense. We're going to pause here, but I think we need to ponder how often, because we have a filter that we've acquired through pain, hurt, disappointment, loss, that how often we actually assign motives that aren't there, and we misinterpret and misread situations. As we go to break, I often bring up the time when Hannah went to the temple, cried out to God, and Eli accused her of being drunk. Why? Not because she had a history of drinking, but because his sons were drinking in the temple. I just really believe that he had this pain filter through which he saw other situations. We just ask God to show you if you've got pain filters and you're reading things wrong, especially within marriage. As we go to break, as Dr. Emerson is speaking, I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians 13:7. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. So may we discern when our spouse is actually protecting and trusting and hoping and persevering. Help us to understand each other's language and our ways of preserving the marriage. We'll be back in a minute. This is Susie Larson, host of Susie Larson Live. You know, life can get so busy, and maybe for you, you're starting to feel the toll on your soul. Well, God can make a way in your life through every season, and He's always up to something new. How about you set apart some time to be set apart and discover what God wants you to know, what God wants you to do. Join us at the upcoming Set Apart Conference. It's for women on March 8th and 9th. You'll enjoy vibrant worship, workshops, fellowship, great speakers. Give your spirit the spa treatment. Register today at setapartconference.com. Hope you're having a really fantastic day. Thanks for tuning in to Susie Larson Live, talking to Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. And his book is titled The Love and Respect Devotional, 52 Weeks to Experience Love and Respect in Your Marriage. It's a beautiful hardcover devotional. He puts so much thought into making this palatable and engaging for men as well as women. It's just so well done. At the end of each short reading, there's a prayer, but there's also some really practical advice. Like, I love this one so much. Like, he suggests that when we're in conflict, we reiterate the big vision. Say something like, okay, we know in the big picture, God has joined us together. Let's look for his way past this. And in fact, that comes out of a daily reading titled, God joined you together. He will keep you together. Unpack that one if you would.
Well, I referenced earlier, that's based on Jesus' statement in Matthew 19. And where he's very clear. And this is where I'm appealing to husbands and wives to remember those early days that God joined you together. And God joined you together because he has that purpose for the two of you. And there is this kind of a rear view mirror look at this now, because people kind of say we've gotten derailed here and we're individually seeking the Lord, but we don't pray together. We don't ask God to use us as a couple. And it doesn't mean that you both have the same spiritual gifts, same interest, but at least you're praying for each other, not unlike you did toward your husband on the way out to work, that you laid your hand on him, that you were supportive of what he was up to and out to accomplish for the kingdom. I mean, there's sense that we're in this together for something that's bigger than ourselves. You know, when my daughter Joy married a little bit later in life and she met her husband, they're in Portland, Michigan. They're now in Paris, France. But one of the things I recognize, both made a commitment to be a mature person first. You know, many people say, I want to find the right person rather than thinking about being the right person. But they both committed to being mature and then finding someone's mature, but then with the belief that they were going to commit themselves to something beyond the marriage, to a sense of ministry and mission beyond the marriage. And almost every couple I've met had an inner sense, or at least a hope for that to happen. And so my appeal is, we need to get back to that, because there's coming a day when we're going to ascend into that eternal realm, and the Lord is going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. At least I hope he is. And when I exposited, for instance, Ephesians or Colossians, Ephesians 1 through 3 is doctrine, 4, 5, and 6 is application. Colossians 1 and 2 is doctrine, 3 and 4 is application. And when Paul swings from doctrine to application, he does so in the husband-wife relationship, the father-child relationship, master-slave, and Peter and others will sometimes do authority-citizen. Those are the hinges that you swing on. And the very first hinge that Paul swings on is the husband-wife relationship. And he says, you do what you do as to the Lord. It's not about your spouse, but Jesus Christ standing beyond your spouse, that you are loving Christ as you're loving your wife. You're reverencing Christ as you're respecting your husband. There's where the Lord is watching. And not only that, but we represent Christ in the church. And one of the challenges is we should be living in such a way that there's a melody coming out of our marriage that the people around us say, tell me the words to that melody. Explain this to me. But that's not happening to the extent that I think many of us sensed early on that God called us to do. So the question is, can you get back on that rail? Many men who are listening to this, women want their husbands to be the spiritual leader. They don't fight against that. They want him to initiate prayer. They want him to read the devotional. They want him to read the Bible. If she senses that he's trusting Christ and under the umbrella of Christ, she will come under his umbrella. And I say to every man out there, if you sense that God called the two of you to something bigger than yourselves, take this encouragement today to say to your wife, can we just maybe pray silently? I want to pray for you and with the kids and with our needs. Just humbly move in that direction. Get back on that team again, because the Lord intends for you to do something. And my appeal to you is, I long for you to hear, well done, good and faithful servant.
So good. Emerson, what do you know about God now that you didn't know as well 5 or 10 years ago?
So we could say, I know very little because he's too big for me to know much. That's for sure. But I
Right.
think Sarah and I have been married 50 years. The runway is getting shorter, as I say. And we've prayed, the scripture teach us to number our days, that we would present to you a heart of wisdom. Sarah and I prayed that early in our marriage. Lord, teach us to number our days. We're only here for so long. Help us then each day to do what you want us to do. And we failed many times, but that's been a core prayer. But now we're at that age where that's we're we're nearing that time. And I think there's just many of my friends. I had a good friend, B.J. Weber, who was the chaplain of the Yankees for years and lived in Manhattan, my good buddy from the 70s. He had brain tumor and cancer and died. And earlier, I had another man, a good buddy, who died of brain cancer. And so, the loss of my friends and just the realization, and I pastored for many years, and many who age realize, you outlive all your friends, outlive all your family, and the loneliness and the sadness. So I think Sarah and I are praying, Lord, help us finish well, help us to present to you that heart of wisdom. So I think that's been, a deepening realization, Susie, that Sarah and I both have had.
Thank you. Well, this has been phenomenal, and we're out of time, but thank you for this time today. What a beautiful conversation. God bless you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, too, for tuning in today. I pray you found some encouragement here today. We sure love and appreciate you. It's an honor to do this journey with you. We'll meet you back here next time. Thanks for listening to Susie Larson Live. Podcasts like mine are available because of your support. If it's important to you to hear things that encourage your faith, click the link in the show notes and give now.